Lots and lots of people today are very nervous, disturbed, distressed, annoyed by the political parties that they thought were their representatives. Similarly with lots of other organisations as well. Many workers have lost faith in the leadership of trade unions. Many country people have lost faith in the National Party or the Farmers Federation as genuine representatives of what they thought were their interests. And in fact, in many ways, those organisations have gone on to now represent other interests and have lost their relationship with the base that they came out of. And that's been a disturbing feature of my political life now for the last at least 20 years, to the point where I've actually worked with farmers and with other people who are facing significant communal distress in an attempt to try and build some new relationships that are not based on culture or tradition. Because it seems to me that we've reached a point where political representation has become so distant from the organisational form or its base that it's no longer meaningful. Many people laughingly refer to the Labor Party as the Alternative Liberal Party, as its ALP. The Greens have certainly come into the play, not because they necessarily is a time for a Green alternative, but because people have become disenchanted with what was the progressive wing of the Labor Party. In fact, that left wing of the Labor Party has virtually disappeared. Most notably, if we take the refugee question, it was Jerry Hand, a leading member of the Victorian left of the Labor Party, who instituted compulsory mandatory detention in 1992. And so for me, in the last 20 years, I've been searching for alternative ways of building relationships that are based on the needs of people rather than the ideas that have existed necessarily in their heads leading up to that place. So in the early 90s, when I was involved with Bankwatch, which were a group of rural farmers in the main who were concerned about the high mortgage rates that were then being imposed by the federal government and who were in danger of losing their farms. And the Bankwatch movement developed a slogan that said, we want our neighbours and not our neighbour's farm, which I thought was a wonderful encapsulation of that community spirit. And I saw some really wonderful examples of people prepared to take action that, if they thought about it in the cold light of day or in any other economic period, would have been shocked by their own performance and their own behaviour. A woman in Oyen, for example, threatening to dig a trench and stand in it with a .22 rifle to shoot the banks when they came onto the property to take the last block of land that her and her family had, was stunning. And she admitted, of course, that she'd been a National Party or a Country Party voter all of her life. And about the same time, Phil Cleary came onto the scene, as did Peter Andren in Killare in Western New South Wales. And Cleary was a progressive, and Cleary remains a progressive, and I was delighted to be able to work in that milieu where people came together with an expression of hope that there would be something that would emerge from Cleary's campaign that would build something substantial, that would fill the vacuum that had been left by the collapse of the Labor Party and its progressive side in particular. Similarly, when Peter Andren came on the scene, he was elected on Liberal Party preferences at the first election, and then along came John Howard with his will determine who comes to this country and by what means. And Andren was vehemently opposed to that position. And for someone in the bush, where you would think that reactionary nature would have been clearly supporting Howard, Andren managed to improve his primary vote in the next election, the Howard election, to winning on a primary vote. At the subsequent elections that he stood for, he continued to improve his primary vote by standing as a progressive in the bush. And so what gives me great heart at the moment is in fact the emergence of the independents in the federal parliamentary arena. I think they've done wonderful things despite the way in which the press are clamouring to destroy them, really. I mean, they can't stand complexity. They want simplicity. They want simple sports commentator like he said, she said, you're right, I'm wrong, sort of very simplistic political material that passes for political commentary these days. And I think the fact that those four independents, including Katter, and I think I'd be delighted to have Bob Katter come to Melbourne and demonstrate to him that someone from the far left, like myself, could establish a very close working relationship with him on a number of simple and very basic issues. The question of food security stands out as the most obvious one. I think it's absolutely criminal that Australia is importing food from countries who can't afford to feed themselves in order to undercut horticultural and agriculture in this country. And the recent move by Coles, for example, to reduce the price of milk to $1 is criminal, is quite clearly criminal, and is designed ultimately to destroy farming communities, in particular the dairy industry. So for me at the moment, I would clearly like to see anybody who's prepared to defend the gains of the Enlightenment, that wonderful notion, that rationality, humanity, democracy, which is being manifested in communities throughout the Middle East right now. People who agree on those fundamental principles should stand together, and we should almost forget the 20th century as a political epoch, because it's so complex and so difficult to determine right from wrong in that period, and the discoloration of the many political tendencies that have occurred there make it very difficult. So I would be happy to stand beside anybody that's prepared to defend rationality, the role of science in society, and humanity. And that would be an amazingly strong step forward. And that's where I think organisations like the Peace Network during the early part of this decade, where the churches, the trade unions, the environmental groups, the political parties of the left all came together and acted in a consensual, collaborative fashion, is an indication, an embryo of what is to come if we are to survive the current period. Mother Nature has clearly decided she's going to teach us a lesson or two, and it's time that we respond to that with some rational behaviour rather than the irrationality of whether or not a $20 tax on carbon might or might not be good for the environment and bad for our pockets. So I look forward to the next period as a period where we in fact put aside all of those things that have made us different in the past and look for those things that can unite us into the future.